The US government shuts down over a failed budget deal. On the day President Trump celebrates his first year in office, workers are told to stay home. Democrats and Republicans trade insults. But who's really to blame, and what does it mean for Trump's administration? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Donald Trump's first year anniversary as US president will certainly go down in history. It was the day the government shut down. Congress failed to back a bill to fund federal agencies. Hundreds of thousands of government workers are affected. Some will stay home because their offices will be closed. Others will work without pay. Republicans and Democrats blame each other for not reaching a last-minute deal. Talks broke down over issues related to immigrants and border security. We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, Patty Culhane reports from Washington, D.C.
This is not the anniversary any leader wants to have. It was exactly 1 year ago when Donald Trump made this promise and became president.
We will face challenges. We will confront hardships, but we will get the job done.
He vowed government would work again. It's clear with this, it isn't. Republicans who control the Congress and the White House lost 4 of their own members but picked up 5 Democrats. Still not enough to pass the bill. That means many non-essential government employees won't be coming to work on Monday without a deal. Although most essential federal services will continue. The employees just won't get paid until it's over. It came down to this, a program that was in place to protect children brought into this country without documentation. President Trump threw it out, said Congress should fix it. He promised to help.
If we do this properly, DACA, you're not so far away from comprehensive immigration reform. And if you want to take it that further step, I'll take the heat. I don't care. I'll take all the heat you want to give me.
They brought him a bipartisan deal, and he refused to sign it. So Democrats refused to help pass the budget. Now the White House is saying they still have the weekend to work out a deal.
I think it'll be taken care of before Monday.
That's what I just said. I said I absolutely think there's a really good chance that it gets fixed before the offices are supposed to open.
For now, it is a standoff, a functioning government held hostage, while 2 parties wait to see which side the public will blame for the very dysfunction that Trump promised to end exactly 1 year ago.
What we've just witnessed on the floor was a cynical decision by Senate Democrats to shove aside millions of Americans for the sake of irresponsible political games. The government shutdown was 100% avoidable.
This will be called the Trump shutdown because there is no one who deserves the blame for the position we find ourselves in more than President Trump.
Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's have a look at what a government shutdown means. As of Saturday, hundreds of thousands of government employees will stay home on unpaid leave. Others will work without pay. National parks and monuments may be closed. Visa and passport processing could be delayed. But essential services related to national security and domestic safety will remain functional. The failure of the 2 sides to reach a deal on funding is mainly due to immigration. The Democrats wanted the new bill to include protection for undocumented immigrants who enter the U.S. as children. In September, Trump ended a program agreed by former President Barack Obama granting them temporary legal status. And some Republicans are not convinced by Trump's funding demands for new border controls, including his proposed Mexican wall. So whose fault is it? Republicans and Democrats are pointing the finger of blame at each other. The White House issued this statement. Senate Democrats own the Schumer shutdown. Tonight, they put politics above our national security and military families, vulnerable children, and our country's ability to serve all Americans. We will not negotiate the status of unlawful immigrants while Democrats hold our lawful citizens hostage over their reckless demands. This is the behavior of obstructionist losers, not legislators. The last shutdown was in 2013 and lasted for 16 days. Donald Trump blamed the then President Barack Obama for the standoff. This is what he said in an interview to Fox News. The problems start from the top and have to get solved from the top. The president is the leader, and he's got to get everybody in a room, and he's got to lead. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Lubbock in Texas, Oliver McGee, who has publicly supported President Trump and previously worked as Assistant Transportation Secretary under President Clinton. From London, Inderjeet Parmar, Chairman of the Obama Research Network at City, University of London. And from Lancaster, Richard Johnson, who lectures in US politics and international relations at Lancaster University. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. McGee this. How did we get to this point, a government shutdown?
Well, as Secretary of Defense Mattis said today, keep steady as you go, stay on course, and stay alert. This is really all about trying to protect the guns and the money. The Defense Department is going to stay pretty much so on track on national security, and also to protect law and order, what we like to call John Locke's life, liberty, and property in the Department of Justice. Most of those employees are going to be on permanent appropriations, permanent compensation, and not appropriations. But we got here because Chuck Schumer wanted to really push this negotiation towards DACA. They're really looking to establish a voting base for 2018 and to also pressure the president in trying to bend just a little bit on DACA at this moment. But the president faced a real tough first negotiation, because when they really take out the wall, that's a BATNA, best alternative to walking away. And so when President Trump was campaigning, and he was campaigning for every 48 hours to 10,000 people, he was just simply saying that, we got to build the wall or else. And so that's going to be a no deal if that doesn't happen to play. So that's really how we got here.
Okay.
And so,
Mr. Parmar, it's rare to have a shutdown when the president, his party controls both chambers, the Congress, the House, and the Senate. Is it a deepening political divide over sticking points the main reason why we got to this point of a shutdown?
I think, yeah, that's right. It's quite rare. And I think, therefore, that pushes the responsibility for the final decision to shut down towards the dominant party. And the dominant party in this case is playing a short game as well as a long game, in my view. I think the short game is really to divorce the DACA, the Dreamers issue, from the other issues. And I take up the point that Mr. McGee made, which is that actually the Democrats had gone a long way towards meeting many of the demands that the Trump administration had put forward on the Mexican wall. For example, earlier in the process, accepting to pay up to $18 billion towards the building of the wall with an immediate down payment of something like $1.5 billion. And then an agreement on more ICE agents and even on military spending increases. So I think in the end, this plays into the longer game I think the Trump administration has been playing. And I think that is much more to do with what American identity, and particularly its kind of racial identity, is really all about. And I think controlling immigration, increasing deportations, and the kind of comments that President Trump made in a previous meeting where he said that people from Africa and places like that are not really welcome. They want more people who look like Norwegians. And I think that is the big game that they're playing. And the Dreamers issue, therefore, was a big sticking point. And I think they want to make a big political point. So the people playing a political game are really, I think, there's the Republican Party. But it also shows us that the Democrats are willing to go a long, long, long way to compromise, and they're still not getting anything.
Mr. Johnson, is DACA, which shields young immigrants from deportation, the main obstacle to a bipartisan bill, or do you think the DACA itself has been sort of manipulated by both parties to further their political agenda?
Well, I think this is the sticking point in this negotiation. And it's interesting that the Democrats are sort of staking the future of the continued government funding on DACA. Polls have showed that a majority of Americans think it's more important to continue government funding than the DACA program. And so the Democrats are speaking to their electoral base who care about DACA. Of course, those who are affected by the DACA program themselves can't vote. It affects about 800,000 non-US citizens. And so I wonder if the Democrats are playing this high-stakes gamble, which is what it is, because they sense a degree of weakness from President Trump. Perhaps President Trump owes some of the blame here because he sent mixed signals. And so perhaps Chuck Schumer is willing to stick his neck out on DACA because he believes that President Trump might budge. He might make a concession on this. So we'll see in the next few days what happens. But I think it is at the core of the issue here today.
Speaking of DACA, Mr. McGee, this is what the Democrats are saying, that they were willing forward to move ahead with the bill and that everything was fine until the Republican establishment started sending very mixed signals about DACA, the need to wait until March the 5th, while the Democrats were saying, give us a deal on the DACA, we'll give you a deal on the immigration.
I think the Republicans are very right that they want to have a little bit more time to talk about this. I totally agree with the Republican Party that they want to push this out to March 5th. DACA is a very, very difficult issue to determine and to resolve for America. And more importantly, the Republicans, like the Democrats, are looking at the polls. And as my colleague said, the American people are not strongly backing just a push ahead, an immediate head on DACA without having a thoughtful conversation with the American people about immigration reform, serious immigration reform. And this is also going to set the stage on how we look at immigration reform across international borders, particularly as we're trying to keep up with this vast international markets. Basically, as I said before many times, even Theresa May is having this type of debate in trying to establish Brexit, because international borders and international security is very much so tied to prosperity across the nation states. And right now, the nation states are basically interested in international trade, good free trade that will create jobs and also keeping up with this economy. Donald Trump is overseeing a 31% increase in the Dow in its first year, and that's the largest increase in the Dow since FDR in 1933. So what we saw back then, we had to make some transformative changes in what America was. And so now America is making another transformational change in America First. And America First, as he said in his inaugural address last year, was really about securing our borders, but also securing our markets, and at the same time communicating exclusively with the American people to give them what they need and want, and while we're trying to also advance and get public understanding of science and technology so they can be able to gauge the markets as well, and also to be able to engage capital and jobs.
This brings me to another follow-up question on the DACA thing. Mr. Parmar, the Republicans are saying that if the Democrats were genuine about the need to have to avert a shutdown, they could have waited until March the 5th. How urgent is a DACA fix? Does it need to be solved now, or can it wait until the March the 5th?
Well, it's quite clear that what my colleague at Lancaster said, that there is a political game being played by both sides, an attempt to exploit a certain vulnerability. Obviously, a government shutdown is a very, very significant, major political issue, and in terms of the people who are going to be paid or not. And this issue could possibly wait. But when you see an opportunity of this type, clearly political operators are going to try to take it. But I think they are playing a political game. And it's not as if the Republicans aren't. I mean, they threw in the child health insurance program as a kind of extra incentive. in order really to derail this as well. So I think to some extent the shutdown was something which both sides were willing to risk in order to get through the kind of things that they want. And overall, I think they're very much closer to an agreement overall than they would appear to be. And this is a very dramatic kind of standoff.
Okay.
But
Now,
in the big picture, the Democrats have gone closer to the Republicans.
Mr. Johnson, if this is a political game, what if it backfires? 1996, 2013, the Republicans tried the same tactic. It really backfired. Is there any potential for this to backfire on the Democrats, who would be ultimately seen by the Americans are the real impediment to this deal?
Well, I think the Democrats could be playing with fire here. As the report noted, 5 Democratic senators actually voted with the Republicans to continue the government funding. These are senators who represent states that President Trump won in 2016, and they are up for election this year. States like Missouri, West Virginia, North Dakota, Indiana. And so those senators are, the polling suggests that in those states, those senators will be getting the blame if the government doesn't continue with the funding. And the DACA issue is not one that really resonates with voters in those states. Those states tend to have low immigrant, low minority populations by and large. And so while this may play well in states like California and Texas for the Democrats, it may help them in some of the House elections, it could ultimately hurt them in holding some seats in the Senate elections in November.
Mr. McGee, I read your article about 2 days ago where you said basically that Trump is riding this wave of unprecedented economic reforms, an unprecedented boom in the market, and that therefore he will continue to ride that wave of popularity. Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate minority leader, said yesterday that the shutdown is an example of how dysfunctional and inefficient the Trump administration it is. He says one word, but the other leaders of the Senate and the House say something different. Isn't this something that the American people will end up believing?
Well, Chuck Schumer is actually talking like an efficient leader. He is really about the counting the dimes and nickels and quarters in the purse strings, as he should. But Donald Trump is really looking in the realm of American dignity. He is acting, in a sense, putting a message out there of dignity over efficiency. He's saying that American populism is prosperity, but also international populism is also international prosperity. So as he builds America and makes her strong, he's going to take that message out abroad, and that's going to be permeating across, because America's markets can't grow without the international markets. We're in partnership with them. But also, American trade has to work with international trade. And the key thing is that Donald Trump, as I said in my article on Sky News, that he doesn't want America to get ripped off anymore. That's as simple as that. And the American people are really backing him 100%. When I look at my Twitter, and I typically do polls and get a sense of where the voters are on my Twitter, they're 100% loving this economy. They're loving the job growth of 2 million jobs. They're loving the fact that there's $8 trillion of new wealth in this economy. We've never been this wealthy since FDR. And so we're really, really enjoying that. But make no bones about it. He said every 48 hours in a campaign speech for a year, he held a rally for every 48 hours. He said, build that wall.
Okay.
If that is a campaign promise that he is going to keep, and that is very popular amongst his voters.
Mr. Parmar, I mean, let's look into what's next. What are the options available for all the parties? Now, there could be this stopgap measure that could allow for a short-term deal that could go for a month, where the Democrats will give the go-ahead for the $18 billion for the border security in exchange for a leverage on the DACA. Is this something that could potentially happen, or do you believe this is going to continue as a political conflict between the two parties?
That's a really difficult question. I suspect that both sides will at a certain point want to reach a deal, because they're going to alienate even more supporters, more voters. It's impossible to predict exactly how long this standoff will go on. But the problem is that what this centers the whole debate on is, in a way, a kind of a diversionary tactic which helps the Republicans a lot more and Donald Trump a lot more. It suggests that the whole issue is about foreigners and immigrants and, as Mr. McGee said, people ripping America off in one way or another. And it's kind of blaming the outsider, the foreigner, the other. And in fact, if you look at the sort of so-called wealth produced in the last 12 months and even for many years before that, the ownership of that wealth, the distribution of that wealth and that income is heavily unequal. This new economy with the 2 million jobs, it remains to be seen how safe and secure and well-paid they really are. And I think a large part of what President Trump has been doing is diverting attention onto the wall and onto race and those and immigration and so on, when actually he's been transferring wealth, income and power to the groups of people that he most favors. That's the big corporations.
Okay.
And I'm afraid he's using this issue to promote that agenda even more.
Mr. Johnson, let's imagine for a second you're a chief Democrat strategist. You have the midterm elections. If you show the world or the Americans you're giving some concessions on the border security, then you would have a backlash from the states where you have a huge percentage of immigrants. If you move forward with your position, then the states where your own people are running for re-election, which were won by Donald Trump, might not vote for you. So how to strike a delicate balance in this situation?
It's a very difficult needle to thread. I think that perhaps if I were to guess, what Chuck Schumer is doing is he is trying to send signals to the Democratic base that he has tried, has had a good faith effort on DACA. Perhaps there will be a separate vote on DACA down the road, which ultimately won't go anywhere because the House won't approve it and the President would not approve it, but at least there might be a symbolic vote on it. But I think at the end of the day, Schumer, he can string this out for a bit, but I don't think that he can do it forever without damaging those Democratic Senate candidates, many of them who are in these Trump-dominated states. I think Donald Trump, if I was advising Donald Trump, he needs to bring on those Republicans who voted with the Democrats last night to defund the government. And that shows a failure of leadership from the Republican side. There were 5 Republicans, in fact, who voted no. 1 Republican who didn't vote, Senator McCain, because of his health. So he needs to get those people on side as well as bringing over a few more Democrats if he wants to keep the government funded.
Mr. McGee, you seem to be most of the time pinning all your hopes against a character, President Trump. Yesterday, he had to meet on his own with Chuck Schumer, leaving many to question whether this is a legitimate move, because ultimately it's not just one person, it's about an establishment. It's about the Republican establishment, at both chambers. Isn't this someone who is undermining even the chances for the Republican establishment to thrive in the near future?
No, he's just doing the mechanics of the art of the deal, the negotiation tactics. Sometimes when you are negotiating with a key principal, it's sometimes good to get in the room alone and kind of hash out the real issues and find out what the options are and really get to know your opponent very, very well. Because ultimately, when you're in negotiation with someone, as President Trump is with Chuck Schumer, they're going to come out in agreement, and sometimes they're going to find some common ground, but they're going to find some sticking points in there. And make no bones about it, a government shutdown, this is the 12th government shutdown we've had since 1981 in the first year of Reagan. This is really not big stuff. We got a $4 trillion government, and basically a shutdown is $1.5 billion a day. So all we need to do is count the days and then multiply by $1.5 billion, and that's how much this is costing to taxpayers. So in relation to the size of the government, it's pennies. But this is very big dollars associated with politics on the Democratic side and the Republican side. And either side can't afford to give too much away from their base. Now, make no bones about it, Chuck Schumer has a very, very strong emotional base that is really looking after 2018 to come off of a very, very tough loss in 2016. And Donald Trump has some promises to keep. he has some promises to keep, and one of them is basically build that wall, but also to keep winning. He needs to create winning, and that's what he really wants to keep going.
It would be interesting to see how this political saga would come to an end. So Oliver McGee, Inderjeet Parmar, Richard Johnson, thank you very much indeed. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.